Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast, the voice of bodybuilding. My guest is making a surprised face. We have Aram back on the podcast. So, if you don't know who that is, it's 4 weeks to the fucking beach.
I don't even have a name anymore. It's just my Instagram handle, which I actually got yelled at for that by a couple of people in the industry. They said that you really need to put your name on your Instagram page so people can associate a name to the brand as opposed to just the Instagram handle. So I changed that, and now I actually do have my name on there. And who knows if anybody reads it, but it's there.
Yeah, I feel like as well, it's almost what culture we live in regards to the social media side of things. And I'd imagine we're going to talk quite a lot about that today with the title being called Fuck Nutrition. But we do live in this world where, you've got to be a bit different, you've got to be a bit catchy, you've got to potentially call things out, which you do in an educational fashion, which is why I feel like we've connected so well because it's not just being a dickhead, it's like actually this is essentially what I'm calling out, but I'm going to give you some education behind it as well. And that is at times what we lack when we're talking about things like nutrition, training, etc. It's like this crazy world, and it's like, where do I go with this? Even if you've got a coach.
It's hard because it's easy to use like the Stitch videos and like the Stitch culture. Like and now the call out thing is very, very big. A lot of content creators are taking other people's reels or other people's content and then talking over it. I just find that to be like a cheap way of getting attention. And there's some people that do it very well. Like James Capola does it relatively well. Joey Munoz does it relatively well. Dr. Ids obviously is doing this every single day. But like in Dr. Ids's fashion, like it makes sense for him to do it because he's literally calling out myths and problems and he's helping people for the greater good. But I think to like build yourself up on the backs of other people to me is just not something I'm not on TikTok, so I don't see that world. And the way that my algorithm is structured, I don't really see a lot of the bullshit content. Like I don't see any like the grocery store warriors. I don't see like the teenage TikTokers who are talking about drug use and all this other stuff. I don't see any of that. So I feel like I'm in a different bubble. But you spend an hour on social media a day and you'll find something that pisses you off that you can certainly talk about. But if the fuel behind that fire is to say, hey, I don't agree with this and I think I can create a more helpful, productive message to my audience, then it makes sense. But if it's just for the sake of saying, I'm going to rip this person apart and make myself look better, that's stuff that I don't agree with and I don't prescribe to because what that does is it creates a culture of audience that expects that type of content. And if you look at any of the people that do Stitch videos like James Capola, if you ever go to his account, the people in his comment section are just fucking mean people. And these are people that are supposed to be like, the most sensitive and the most woke individuals on the planet. And they're some of the most critical and harsh individuals because they're just like, it's like they're grabbing their pitchforks and running at the evil witch of the town just because James now took this person and villainized them and made them look evil. And he's not trying to do that, I don't think. Like I've talked to him a few times and he's a very nice guy, but that's just what ends up happening, unfortunately. There's no control over that.
Yeah, and it does, hate breeds hate a lot of the time, and good sees good, and there's mixtures in between that. I think that sometimes as well, it's within ourselves where we need to take acknowledgement. If something does trigger you, if you're a consumer and you read something, watch something, or whatever, if something's triggering you, it's like, actually, why is that? And I spoke about this about, podcasts and longer form content. If I was to say something on this episode, someone's listening and they go, that's really fucking pissed me off. I feel like it's something we can actually explore ourselves and go, hmm, maybe why am I following this person? Why do I feel this way about this content, etc., etc. But again, that comes from the sort of self-acknowledgement and the mindset side of things. And I don't think a lot of people are going to maybe think that way. And I think that that's important too.
I just, if you have enough time to get upset about social media, like where are you focusing your attention and your interest? That's what's always bothered me. I've just never understood. Like, don't get me wrong, social media is my job. It's your job. Like we have to show up as people that create content in order to solidify our brand and to create awareness on what we're doing and to be able to monetize a business model. So we have much different intentions with social media than most pedestrians do. Because what does a normal person do? They get on social media and they doom scroll for 45 minutes to an hour. And what does that do to their mental state? It shows them things that they want to see more of, right? If you click on this, it'll show you more of that. If you click on that, it'll show you more of that. So you're telling the app what you want to see. So you don't also get to get upset about the stuff it shows you. And at any moment, you can choose to not do that. You can choose to spend your time more productively. They still make these things too, and you can still read these things every once in a while. Yeah, well, actually, this is a good one. If you haven't read this one, John Goodman's Getting Clients and Referrals. It's actually a very good book. Um, and just instead of spending 35 minutes just swiping through videos on your phone and then potentially getting triggered by something or being exposed to horseshit information, because it's not going to be my content that pops up or your content that pops up because we don't have enough clout and enough firepower. It's going to be the guy that has 1,000 or 1 million followers on Instagram who's popular, or it's going to be the chick who's got 750,000 followers on Instagram who's going to pop up. And that's going to be the majority of what you're seeing. And that's just not real life. Like, they're not putting out content to help you. They're putting out content to be controversial, to get more eyeballs on themselves. And they're also probably trying to sell you some bullshit affiliate code to some product that you don't actually need. Like, we're selling a service. A service is harder to sell because a service requires participation. It's not just a set it and forget it. I bought this powder, I bought this pill, I bought this supplement, and now all my problems went away. It's like, no, I have work to do with my lifestyle. I have to relearn how to eat properly. I have to understand how to lift weights. I have to understand how to control variables of my lifestyle. And that's what we're helping people with. And there's no way to make that message sexy. It's like, I can certainly guide you and mentor you, but there's still work that you have to do. And a lot of people in today's culture just don't want to be responsible for it anymore.
Yeah, it is for sure. And also, I guess on top of that, we're looking at dopamine hits, aren't we? And that relates actually to our topic today of nutrition. The dopamine hits from social media, from certain people, from certain foods, all of these things. And again, that feeds this culture of like the next best fad diet. Oh, that person's doing that. I want to do that. And our job, as you've outlined there, is working with individuals, and actually what they need as an individual person. What's also their past, their present, what are they looking to achieve? And it's that, as you say, sort of boring stuff because it's like the all of these things that accumulate to this person today, and this is what I like to look at. I know you do as well. How have we got to this position in our life, and what are the food behaviors, the relationship with food, your environment? What has led you here? Because the likelihood is that we could still have habits creep in 2 years down the fucking line. But this is where, if you're just looking at something on Instagram or the internet, or maybe you're not bonding with a coach, gets forgotten, doesn't it? And it's like, actually, these things led you here today, if you know what I mean.
Well, take an alcoholic or a drug addict. Like, those tendencies don't really dissipate. They just get quieter. The noise gets quieter. And it gets quieter because people have done some level of work internally to understand what their relationship with their problem is. If you're somebody who doesn't regulate emotion well, or if you're somebody who's in a constant state of stress and you're surrounded by hyper palatable food, well, you're going to use that food as a stress coping mechanism because that's the easiest thing in the world to do. Like, I don't want to feel something, so I'm just going to eat something. And it's not like you're not reaching for grilled chicken and carrot sticks when you're in that state. You're reaching for chips and cookies and bullshit, and you're going to order the food online that's convenient, that's going to soothe your soul. And there's nothing wrong with that every once in a while. I think if you, there's been times where instead of having dinner, I ordered 2 bags of chips and I ordered a pint of ice cream, and that was my dinner for the night. But that happens, once every 4 to 6 months. That's not happening 3 or 4 times a month. And at the end of the day, I think when people are frustrated by how they look and how they feel, they forget that it's their responsibility. It may not be their fault. I don't like blaming individuals, but I do like to have people take enough ownership to say, maybe I can be doing some stuff to work on my stress. Maybe I should improve my relationship with food and not think about it just from a sake of either dieting or I'm off the rails completely. Like, I think being in a place of peace with their food and being in a place of peace with substances in general is a really wonderful place to be, but it takes a ton of mental effort to get there because as somebody who's, I used to I don't think anybody uses cocaine. I think everybody abuses cocaine, and Lord knows I was abusing it for a very long time. You don't buy Coke with the idea that I'm going to have any leftovers.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not like I'm going to buy this 8 ball of Coke and there's going to be some left over for tomorrow night too. Like, no, you're going to buy the bag and it's going to be gone by the end of tonight, and you're probably going to be calling the guy back for more. And there's a stigma around that, right? If I was abusing cocaine and my friends knew about it, they'd probably tell me to stop or they'd probably want to help me. But if I'm doing the same thing with cookies or I'm doing the same thing with chips or I'm doing the same thing with soda at night, nobody's going to say anything to me because it's not there's no stigma behind it. There's no societal ick that happens when you overconsume. It's like, oh, you're just having a tough day. It's okay.
Yeah,
But
that'll
if
make
I
it
was,
better.
if I was taking that tough day and I was putting it up my nose and I was shooting it into my veins, there would be so many people coming to the rescue. And food just doesn't have that same level of negative connotation to it until it becomes a weight problem, until it becomes a health problem, or until it becomes so uncontrollable that you don't know how to get yourself out of it without the use of a therapist or somebody jumps on a GLP-1 drug.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's as well, are we disguising certain things with other things? And this is what Sonia and I spoke about, and also had a bodybuilding psychologist on the podcast, and we were talking about, masking it. You know my story. I did it for many, many years. It's like, no, nothing wrong with me. I'm just a bodybuilder. And, actually going in and going, fucking hell, these thoughts are fucked up. And it is constant. And you mentioned earlier about you control the noise, and it's something it's taken me so many years to get to this point. And I feel like sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm at this point and it's really good. And I think actually people might watch my content and think, well, I'm nowhere fucking near that. But it takes that acknowledgement and also trying to deal with, if you need help from someone else, it's like, is there trauma there? Are there things? And that's not fucking easy. And I actually spoke to a friend about this the other day. It's like bodybuilders or powerlifters or whatever your discipline is, there's no time, Aram. There's no time to deal with trauma, but there is. But you tell yourself, I've got all these things, steps, training, food prep, all of these things. And it's like unearthing shit that's gone down in your past. It is not easy. And then you've got the aftermath that could take, hella time. And that's, I feel like it's difficult for people and they're working and everything else to actually take that ownership as well, if you know what I mean.
It's the hard part about food is that it's never going anywhere. You
Hmm.
know, with things like drugs or alcohol, it's much harder to, I mean, alcohol not so much, but with drugs and stuff, it's harder to seek out. You have to have people that you know. You could just walk into a gas station and buy a bag of chips. You can walk into a gas station and buy a 2 liter bottle of soda. And you can't do that with heroin or cocaine. You can't just be like, "Hey, what's up? I'm just going to get my daily fix today." Like you have to go out of your way to do it.
Hmm.
And I think it's understanding why the hell am I doing this thing anyway? There's been times where I overeat and I know that when I'm overeating, it's because in that moment, I don't care about the long-term implications of what's happening. But I'm self-aware enough to know that I don't like the way I feel the next day. It's definitely not in alignment with my goals, my values, and my standards. And it disappoints me a little bit. So I'm going to have to check my behavior and ask myself a few questions. Like the other day, I was sitting on the couch. I was stoned. I mean, I live in California. Weed is legal here. I smoke every day. But I smoke every day. I smoke at night. And when I smoke at night, I can either smoke it and get the munchies, or I can get high the slow way and eat edibles, which don't make me have the munchies. But I don't like the fact that I have to wait for the edibles to kick in. So I tend to smoke because it just gets to the result faster. But I also know that that comes at a price. And the price is I'm going to have much, much higher levels of hunger and cravings. And now with all the different food apps that you have on your phone, I was sitting there and I was basically contemplating before my dinner, like, should I get these pretzel crisps and should I get this package of Reese's peanut butter cups? And
Oh,
I had to like talk myself out of it. And it was very easy to be impulsive to open up the app and start looking. But then as I'm looking through the app and scrolling, if I didn't disconnect myself from the desire to want to do that, I would have easily just hit the buy now button. And within 15 minutes, it would have been at my doorstep and I would have had a 900 calorie bag of pretzels and I would have had a 500 calorie bag of Reese's, which at the end of the day, does it really fucking matter if it's isolated incidents like that? No. I have a 3,500 calorie a day budget. I'm very active. I'm very highly muscular. I'm going to be okay. But if I'm a 35% plus body fat woman and I'm making this decision consistently, which is where most of my clients are, I can't be confused about why it is that I'm gaining weight or why I'm not losing weight because I'm making these decisions impulsively with very little mindfulness involved. I'm not asking myself if I'm hungry. I'm not asking myself if I'm tired. I'm not asking myself if I'm lonely. I'm not asking myself if I'm emotional. I'm just responding and I'm just living life as like an almost like an animal, the same way that an animal would just instinctually grab something. As human beings, that's what we're turning into. We're just instinctually grabbing stuff because it's soothing to us, as opposed to understanding why the fuck am I doing this in the first place? And is there something I can do to reduce that noise a little bit and to have more control over my decision making?
Yeah, for sure. And you raise a relevant point there as well about the difference in people. So that can be gender, that can be if you're active, not active, etc. And it's something that's important, I feel like, in the bodybuilding culture that you can see like post show or going out for meals with other people in the bodybuilding space. Some people can tolerate, as a female, I've been up to 3,500 myself at a height of an off season, which is very good. Um,
Wow.
being assisted as well, so there is a difference there personally. And but before, when I first started out, it would be like 2,200, 2,500. So I found myself in these scenarios where I'd be looking at, huge male bodybuilders and they're fucking eating tons. And I'd be like, oh, this isn't fair. And then I'd want to do it. And it's this like confusion in your head, but it's taken away from, and this is what I feel can be missed a lot when you're on Instagram or whatever, that you're an individual. You might be assisted, you might be natty, you might have good genetics, you maybe, your genetics aren't as favorable for bodybuilding, etc., etc. The list is fucking extensive, isn't it? And it's quite hard to communicate that sometimes.
Well, you also have to ask yourself, and we've talked about this in the last podcast, not everybody should be bodybuilding. Just because it's very trendy right now doesn't mean that you need to get involved in the trend. Like there's no, I mean, I have more knowledge than most people do. I could put myself through a prep tomorrow if I wanted to. You couldn't pay me enough money to bodybuild.
Mhm.
Like if somebody was like, you're going to diet for 16 weeks, you're going to put on a little string bikini, and you're going to walk out on stage, and then at the end of that experience, you're going to get $1 million. I would say, fuck you. There's no way.
Mhm.
Why? Because I don't have the discipline with food, and I don't want to sacrifice. I'm not a competitive person. I don't need to and especially with how ridiculous the standards for bodybuilding have gotten. There's no quality feedback anymore. There's a million people on stage with a million categories that don't make any sense. Everybody and their fucking cousin has an IFBB Pro card now. Everybody has a Wolfpack backpack. Everybody is starting to just jump into this. Like when I was growing up, there was like 20 IFBB pros in the world,
Yeah, it has
and
changed.
you can name them on two hands. And they were special people because they were the only crazy ones. They were the only ones crazy enough to do it. And now you get a girl who's 26 years old who has gone through four eating disorders already from the time that she was a teenager to the time she was in her 20s. And now, because her favorite influencers are bodybuilders, she's like, oh, maybe I can try this. So she hires some dickbag coach for $200 a month who puts her through a prep, who starves her to death, who then creates an even worse eating disorder. And now she has this body image problem that she didn't have before, which has now grown because she's seen herself at her leanest. And she doesn't understand psychologically that she can't stay this lean forever and that she will regain weight when she's done with competition prep. And there's no preparation for that psychologically. The coach then ditches her after her prep is over. She gets on stage. She gets a fifth place trophy that means nothing to her because she didn't win, because she wasn't prepared to begin with. And now she has to psychologically rehabilitate herself while being 25 pounds heavier, not winning, and only having the pictures that she took a couple of weeks before her show that would prove that she was that lean, which now she thinks she has to be that lean forever. It's just, I think bodybuilding has become toxic. And I think that the standards are very ambiguous. They don't tell you what you need to work on, they don't tell you why you need to work on it. There's no feedback that's legitimate anymore. It just depends on if that judge is having a bad day or not, where your placing is going to be. I've seen plenty of people get robbed on stage that should have won. And I've seen some people win that should have no business even being on stage, period. I was at a bodybuilding show here in San Diego, and you should have seen some of these people that they put on stage. They had categories like wife of an active duty service member wellness category, and one person would come up. And this one person looked like she just started training yesterday.
Mhm.
She just had a big ass and she just had a naturally wide set of hips. So she fell into the wellness category. She had probably 27 to 30% body fat on her, no conditioning whatsoever, very little speakable muscle mass. And I'm just saying, like to myself, I'm like, this person has a coach that they paid money for. And that coach had the audacity to put this poor individual up on stage, and they created an entire category just for her, just so they can collect another entry fee and put another button to a seat for $75 for the entry fee. And I'm just saying, like, this is turning into a rabidly greedy business and it's destroying people's mental health. I just don't understand it.
It's scary. It's, for me, and this is why I talk about it, doing it for, if you're going to do it, right, there's, as you've outlined there, the risk versus reward. If you are bringing condition, if you're doing everything to get to stage, what we would view, as you reference, and I started like 12 years ago. So it was like, wow, what I saw on stage. And then over the years, it has for sure changed. And this is where the pursuit of doing it for you. And it's like, why are you actually doing it? So if I sit on a consult with someone and it's like I want to do a prep, I've had a fair amount of people that I've actually transferred into being a lifestyle client because it's not the right decision. And they're like, oh, I've never had someone ask these questions. Like you've really outlined the whole prep, even the finances required for the bikini and all this stuff and all of this stuff. And I'm like, it's not the right time for you. Now that could lose me a client, right? That could lose me, X amount of money or whatever. But I'm like, it's not a good spot. And also confidence as a coach to say we need to redirect here. Yeah, we're in a prep, but no, because if we're going down these rabbit holes of, the psychological warfare that can happen, and I do feel like it's on us as coaches to, see these things happen if there's, and that's lifestyle and, competitive, but it's really missed in this space and it's fucking heartbreaking.
I mean, that's why I would never, I don't want to say never, but like, I'm not a bodybuilding prep coach. I coach very average lifestyle people who are just trying to figure this stuff out. And it's hard enough. Like I'm working with women in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. And the amount of damage that I see in that population from diet culture and from a disordered relationship with food and from years of trying to fit this physical mold that they think, they have to be compliant to because society says that you have to be a certain size or you have to be a certain weight in order to be somebody who's seen and loved and heard. It's tough because men don't have the same pressure. I can put on 30 pounds tomorrow and nobody would give a shit. If you put on 5 pounds, all of your friends will start asking, are you okay? What's going on? Are you depressed? Is anything wrong? Like, what's happening? Like, why did Sarah put on 5 pounds? And that's the unfortunate truth. But now that's psychology. Then there's also physiology. And I think physiologically, what a lot of, I'm going to speak about women because that's who I work with. There's this very prevalent narrative in the space right now that it's things like hormones or your gut health or your age that prohibits you from achieving a certain physique, which I think is just blatantly untrue. And it may not be practical to eat fewer calories, but if your goal is fat loss and you have fat to lose, then you might have to see what low is for you. And your body is the only thing that dictates what your caloric intake can be. I would love to have everybody eat 3,000 calories, but it's unrealistic. That's just
I
not
say
how it
that.
works,
I
right? Like,
say that all the time.
the reason why somebody like you can eat 3,000 calories versus somebody else who's less muscular and doesn't have the experience that you do can't is because they spent their whole life trying to be smaller and doing whatever stuff they did to try to be smaller, which usually isn't lifting weights and which usually isn't eating high protein diets, which is usually doing a lot of cardiovascular work, which just makes them more efficient at cardiovascular work and they actually burn fewer calories doing it. And they've done that while also losing muscle mass, which is so precious that we need to hold on to it with every ounce of will that we have, especially as a woman. And they've done this while eating very low calorie for a very long time, which has now triggered and told their body that, hey, you don't need to eat 1,700 because you live fine on 1,300. So why would I give you more calorie freedom when you do fine at 13? That's now your natural set point. So anything above that becomes a surplus. So if people also want to have the freedom that they want to have on the weekends to have a few dinners out and a few cocktails, it just adds up that much faster. So it's hard to be able to navigate people when you're dealing with psychology, which is very, very variable and is a wild animal of its own, because the physiology is very simple. It's not, there's not a lot of complexity to physiology. I mean, there's a lot of different interplays hormonally and mentally and everything else, but generally speaking, like the calories in, calories out model isn't broken. It's just not always practical because you have to account for people's hunger and you have to account for people's ability to get through their day. And certainly we know that if we push somebody's calories low enough, in the case of competition prep, or in the case of famine, or in the case of prisoners of war, or in the case of the Holocaust, what do we see evidence of? You drop somebody's calories down low enough and you make them work harder and more, they're going to lose fat and they're going to start to become very emaciated because that's the result. But again, that's not practical. Like I'm not going to diet somebody down who's a lifestyle client like they're a comp prep client, or I'm not going to put somebody through the miseries of eating very little and overworking them because it's going to destroy a lot of the pleasures in their life. So people have to ask themselves some questions like, do I understand how to eat and just maintain my weight? Like if you know how to eat, and I don't care if you're heavy, like let's say you are 35% body fat or 40% body fat. If you're not gaining weight month over month, year over year, and you're just learn how to eat, you're already doing better than the average because most average people are gaining weight over the course of a lifetime. So if you're able to maintain weight, I mean, you're already doing better than most. Now, once you have some idea of how I can eat to maintain my weight, now it's a matter of, okay, well, if this amount of food allows me to maintain weight, this amount of food minus a little bit will probably create fat loss. And I don't need to have a timeline in mind. If the timeline can be a year, which really should be the ideal timeline for most people. Don't worry about what you can do in 8, 10, 12 weeks or 6 weeks or 2 months. Just think, I know how to eat. I can maintain weight for periods of time throughout the year. I can diet for short-term periods of time, peel a little bit of fat off each time. As long as I'm preserving muscle mass and eating enough protein and getting enough micronutrients in, I should be relatively healthy. I should do blood work once every 6 months to a year, especially if I'm a woman, to make sure that things are checking out okay. And if I do that repeatedly for the rest of my life, I'm not going to have any problems.
Yeah, for sure. And being able to, of course, flex, I call it sort of flex between the phases. It is almost like a bit of a skill. And being able to do that with a good level of how you view yourself from a body image standpoint, which you touched on as well, being able to view food like it is food is food. We've spoken about it before, right? There's a place for the processed side of things, there's a place for meals out, and it's the belt and braces that create your nutrition as a whole. And if you could adhere to that for however long, and incorporate these things, it's like the dream of where you could find yourself. But I feel like I don't know if it's almost like with the competitive side of things, it's like we want to damage ourselves further sometimes. I don't know if you know what I'm saying with that, because it's like, look, I said this on the pod with you last time, and I was like, Aram, I can't believe how fucking good I feel. Not from an arrogant standpoint, but I'm like, I've got body fat and I feel fucking good. And actually, I did a bit of a social experiment over this off season, and so many people prefer my physique. Not that it matters as such, but I like to do these things, prefer my physique as the off season. Not many people like it when I'm in the tail end of a prep, and I was like, this is interesting, and particularly from the attraction side of things and what we would view as sexy or what men would like. And we're wrapped up in this like I want to punish myself through bodybuilding. I look fucking horrible. I've got a bit of body fat, but actually you come out of that and you're like, actually I don't look too bad, but it is for sure. It's this psychological fucking warfare all the time.
The best expression I ever heard is there's a lid for every pot, right? There's everybody has a potential mate out there somewhere. So and trust me, as somebody who's insecure as hell, who spent their entire life seeking affirmation from women because it was never good enough for me, whether I was 7% body fat or I was 15% body fat or I was weak or I was strong, it never really mattered because at the end of the day, what gravitates people towards other people is not their appearance, it's their personality. So you can certainly be the leanest person on the planet, and superficially that might seem attractive at first, but at some point there's going to be some cracks in the foundation that somebody will find. Like I've dated women that were bodybuilders competitively. And what I found out after about a couple of months or so was that they didn't have really anything interesting about them outside of what they looked like. Some of them, the people that I was with at least. And they were very damaged individuals, meaning they hadn't done any of the mental health work. They hadn't really figured out what makes them happy in life. They were always chasing aesthetics. They were worried about what people think. They had no interesting things to talk about during conversation. Now, I admittedly was very visually stimulated by people most of my whole life. And obviously, we have to be attracted to somebody to stay with them for long enough. It's not just about the personality, it's not just about their emotional intelligence. Like at some point, you have to be physically intimate with people, and there has to be a level of attraction. But if you think about it this way, women will stay with men despite how much weight they gain.
For sure.
Very, 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 very often. I've seen it 100 times. Like I have a client now whose husband put on something like 60 pounds since they've been married. And I've asked her point blank, I said, are you still attracted to him? And she said, yes, I love him. He supports me. And I said, that's not answering my question. You said that you love him and he supports you. Are you attracted to him? Like, what does it feel like when you climb on top of him every time? She said, I overlook his fat because I see something that's beyond his appearance. And I don't know that a lot of men can do that. Like we are visual creatures, and there's some women that are superficial enough to where they they're like, I'm not going to be with a man like that who's going to put on 60, because that speaks to other problems, right? Like people that allow themselves to lose touch with who they. I'm not saying you have to walk around at 10% body fat as a man. I think that's unreasonable. But I think having some standard for self-care is important. Like, I come from a very European culture. My mother's Russian. My
Oh,
mother would not, my mother would, I was born there. My mother would never leave the house. I don't care if the house was on fire, she would still find a minute to put makeup on. That's just how she was. And she took pride in her appearance, and she taught me, because in America, unless you're going to go somewhere to get dressed up for something, a lot of people here don't really take the effort to get dressed up before they leave the house. They wear sweatpants or they wear UGG boots and they just walk out of their house and they're just comfortable. And funny enough, like that wasn't how I grew up. In my house, it was like, I don't care if it's Tuesday afternoon or Sunday morning or Saturday night or Monday morning, you have to walk out and present your best to the world because you never know who's looking at you. Now, that could be a lot of pressure for some people to have to deal with. And some people who aren't confident, who aren't in a place where their mental health is good, you tell something like that to somebody like that, that could destroy their entire week and they may not leave their house whatsoever. So everything comes down to, what is your relationship with your body? Can you accept that there's going to be periods of your time where you're probably going to be less focused on your body and you're going to be more focused on your life or your children or your career, whatever else? And that's going to obviously create challenges for you to comply to a protocol. But can you at least have certain standards in place to take care of your physical and mental health? Can you still sleep well? Can you manage stress? Can you eat enough protein to maintain muscle mass? Can you get to the gym 2 or 3 times a week? And I'm talking about just general life people. I'm not talking about competitors, because competitors are a different breed. What competitors need to learn how to do is they need to learn how to not be competitors. Most competitors that I've ever encountered are very, very good during those 16 weeks of prep, but they're dog shit every other week outside of that. They don't know how to eat properly. They feel like they still have to train 6 days a week and do 45 minutes of cardio a day. They just don't know how to live like normal people, because all they do is they live in this constant state of competition prep. And I'm like, well, you can't do that. It's physiologically impossible to do that. And it's mentally one of the most damaging things you can do. So for competitors, they have to learn how to live like normal people. And normal people need to learn how to raise and elevate their standards a little bit. So it's always like this fight back and forth. And balance is an elusive concept for all of us. Like all of us really can be working on understanding how to balance all of these things better. And you get to a point where you evolve mentally as an individual and you just don't give a shit anymore. Like I know that at 40 years old, I look better than most 40-year-olds. I'm okay with that. Am I going to look at, if I walked into a bodybuilding gym, do I look as good as all the other guys in there? No, but I don't care. I'm not a bodybuilder. I don't hold myself to that standard. I set a standard for myself that I hold on to. That's fine for me. And I can live there forever. What people need to do is they need to find what their specific standard is, regardless of what the world is telling them or whatever visions they see on social media, because that's not real life.
Yeah, for sure. You also see this in regards to the competitive side of things. People do their first prep. As you say, it's so true. The 16 weeks or however long that is, fucking posts celebrating the show, all of this stuff, and then you don't see anything for 4 months, 6 months, and then I've even seen things where it's like they sort of pop back up, and I don't want to say this in a shit way, but it's like there's almost these excuses of hormone health, as you mentioned earlier, or my GI's been playing up, or and actually, when you know the backstory, it's because the relationship with food is pretty fucked, and after the show, as you say, maybe the coach isn't there, etc., etc., and they've lost control. And then again, it's like this whole, okay, so I'm going to go back into a prep because I can't control myself. I just can't control the food side of things. I'm going to diet again. And it's this affiliation to that being the crutch and that being the answer. If you've lost control with the food in the off season and that phase, and then it's this constant yo-yo of like, oh, well, no one will like me here, so what I'll do is I'll do another competition. And it's fucking heartbreaking. I say this as well about, the coaching space and bodybuilding space. I'd love to hear from a lot of the people that win all these shows 6 months after and say, "How are you?" Do you know what I mean? How are you? Like, has your coach looked after you that was the coach of the year in 20 whatever? Have they spoke to you after the show? Have they supported you after the show? And it's stuff like that. And it fucking, I try not to get wound up about it. I'm passionate about it.
But you should be, because you know what you should do if I were you? Like if I was truly in the bodybuilding space the way that you were, I would start an absolutely free weekly or bi-weekly support group for competitors.
I've started webinars, once a month.
But what I would do is I would literally say every week or every 2 weeks, we're going to hop on a Zoom call for an hour and you're welcome to join. It's absolutely free. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about all the psychological implications that you're dealing with. Because as a competitor, I know you. And I know that you need the support, and I know you're not getting it anywhere else. So if I don't do this for you, if I don't hold this space for you, I know that this is not going to happen anywhere else because nobody's going to do this. Like I do this for free once a week with coaches. I started a coaches support group because coaching is a very lonely business. You sit in front of your computer by yourself. You have a couple of friends on Instagram that you talk to, but otherwise it's just you, your laptop, and your clients, and that's all you have. And competitors, like you said, outside of competition, they don't know who they are. They don't know what their identity is. They don't have any support. And they think like unless they go back into a competition prep, they're not important. So I think that there's a wonderful opportunity here to build a community full of people who are dealing with the same issues. And all you have to do is just create that space. And once it's there, I bet you're going to get a massive amount of people that would do that.
Yeah, I do feel something that sat with me when we did a podcast before as well, when we were talking about my awkwardness when people reach out and they're like, this has fucking happened to me. And I'm thinking, holy shit. And, I talk about it openly because I'm always like, well, I don't want to tread on any toes in that. And you called me out. And that's why we're good friends, because it's like, I need people to call me out sometimes because I'm being too nice. And you were like, if someone's, and we don't 100% know, right, the coach and the client and what's been said, but you were like, if someone's getting fucked over, you would step in and say, look, this is not right, and this is how I would move forward, and that stuck with me a lot. You can imagine I have a lot of conversations with stuff that can be happening in this space.
Yeah, I mean, everybody needs community, and everybody needs to understand that they're alone and broken, because that's what a lot of times happens. Whether it's competition prep, whether it's lifestyle people who have disordered relationships with food, everybody feels like they're on their own mountain and they're the only ones up there, and it's lonely and it sucks. But when you start to realize, like, oh, there's other people who can't control their food, or there's other people that look at themselves, even though they're 20% body fat, they feel like they're still fat. So once they start to realize that there's other people with their own problems, it's no different than Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yeah,
It's no different than Gamblers Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. Like it's just a support group for people. And I don't think that space exists yet in this world. And I think if you started a support group for bodybuilders who are recovering from post-show depression, which is so common, it would be a not only would you be doing the Lord's work, but I think you'd be helping a lot of people remedy their problems because you've been through it, and other people will be able to share their stories in that environment. And now people can start to gain some level of confidence back that they don't have. And who knows the amount of lives you'd be able to impact with that. I mean, most people know what they need to be doing. whether it's nutrition, whether it's fitness, whatever. Most people know they could probably be doing some therapy. Most people know they should be journaling, but it's just like who's actually making the time for that work? But by having a group like that set up, well, what you have now is you have some accountability. I
Mm.
know that if Sarah sets up a meeting once a week or twice a month, and I get to show up to that meeting, I'm going to be less inclined to not do it. So maybe I will show up. And by showing up, I'll start taking other actions that will help me feel a little bit better about my own situation. So I think there's a massive value in community. I think we don't need any more information. The information's there. We're not void of information,
Mm.
but we just need to be able to just have some integrity, do what we say we're going to do, and understand that if we're struggling, that it's okay to ask for help.
Yeah, I do. What you said there is exactly what has actually happened. Just from I've done two webinars, and there was an example that ties in exactly to what you said. A few of them, one said, I really struggle with cheating on my diet, and then another one, I struggle with cheating on my diet as well. And then after the call, I get the messages saying, I've had a week where I haven't cheated on my diet because of the call. So exactly what you say there, it's like that accountability. And the only thing I was like, because I've pitched this as it's literally community. I'm not fucking selling shit and whatever. If someone's interested in coaching, fine, but I'm not doing it for that. And then I was like, oh God, am I going to cause a storm in the bodybuilding space with coaches? And then I was like, I don't fucking care. You know,
Good, you should.
yeah,
You
it's
should cause a storm because the bodybuilding space is one of the last places, like it's unregulated. It's like the Wild West. Nobody gives a shit. Everybody's doing it their own way. And there's a lot of people with a lot of ulterior motives, unfortunately. There's a lot of people who want to make money off of bodybuilding. There's a lot of people who want to profit and prop their own name up, amongst others. And they're unfortunately like, yeah, listen, don't get me wrong. There's plenty of people in the space that I respect that I think are doing it the right way. But that's the minority. That's not the majority. The majority of people are put themselves through one prep, they do a bunch of drugs, they become bodybuilding coaches, and then they start fucking other people up. So if there's somebody like you who has integrity, who's able to create a space for people to come and heal, you're doing something that's so wildly valuable that even if you're not trying to sell coaching, what's going to end up happening is people are going to hire you anyway just because they feel how authentic you are and how much you care. And at some point, people are going to need a little bit more hand holding, and that's just going to naturally produce. Like I've given away, my whole career has been about servitude and giving shit away for free because I know that at some point, what that does is it builds trust. It shows people that I know what I'm talking about, and it shows people that I care. And when they're ready to make a commitment to themselves or to be part of a process that's a little bit more formal, then I'm going to be the person that they're going to want to give their money to because I've earned it already. Right. So it's not even a sales pitch. It's not a sales tactic. It's just because I give a shit enough to give back to the industry the same way that you do. And I think that's just what's wildly missing, especially in the bodybuilding space.
It is as well, with the podcast, even talking to people like yourself, Sonia, psychologists, like people like this, it's like actually opening a narrative to realize there's something that maybe you need to address, with what's going on in here that nobody sees, that you're institutionalized so much that like you're not even present in your life. You're just bodybuilding on autopilot here. And this is the question, when you ask, are you happy? And it's like, I don't fucking know, or are you okay? But the thing is, bodybuilders as well, we're seen as confident people. It's like, I'm fucking bossing this, and my friends in the space, and they're like, people think we're confident, but we're not. You said about your own journey, isn't it? It's like this constant sort of fallacy to head for something from a physique, but inside you're still almost like this lost child, as it were, seeking acceptance.
Confidence comes from, I think confidence has very little to do with appearance.
Mm.
Cockiness comes from appearance. Right? The people that I know that are that are overtly confident are actually the most unconfident people, and they're shrouding their own self-doubts and they're shrouding their own misery and their own problems by presenting themselves and peacocking and showing the world who they think they want to see. But underneath all that, they're full of shit. They're miserable. They probably cry almost every single day, and they have so many problems that they don't want to admit to other people. So they just show up as this person. Confidence comes from basically saying, I'm going to do this. I'm going to say I'm going to do this, but I'm actually going to do it. I don't need to be perfect at it. I don't need to be great at it, but I'm going to learn and I'm going to try to figure this out so that I don't present myself as somebody who's full of shit. And I think having integrity is probably one of the first steps to being confident. Like when you actually say, let's take fat loss for example. If somebody says they're like for the 50th time, I want to lose weight. Okay, cool. How are you going to do it? I'm going to eat out less. I'm going to control my nightly consumption by having a shut off switch at 8 o'clock, and I'm not going to overconsume. And if I do, I'm going to understand why I did it. Okay, now you have action steps in place. Now, do you have the accountability to follow through with those action steps? When nobody's looking and nobody's patting you on the back and nobody's rewarding you for that behavior, because it's going to be a lonely pursuit. There's only so many times that you're going to get rewarded for showing up for yourself, for just taking care of your responsibilities, right? Like nobody gets an award for being a good parent. Nobody gets an award for showing up for work. Nobody gets an award for taking care of their health physically or mentally. You get to reap the rewards based on whatever actually physically or mentally happens to you and the benefits that you feel and the quality of life improvements that you get. So I think one of the first, like when I teach all the women that are in my program, is that I don't care that you don't know how to lift weights and I don't care that you have a shitty relationship with food. You're here because we're going to help you improve those things. We may never fix your body image. We may never actually fix your relationship with food, but we're going to improve it. We're going to let it be so inconsequential to you that it doesn't damage your quality of life anymore. And now, just by showing up for themselves every single day to some small amount, they're building confidence. They're building that repetition. It's like when you go to the gym and you progressively overload an exercise, the muscle gets slightly stronger, slightly bigger every single time. You don't notice it in the short term, but in the long term, when you step back, you're like, oh my God, I put on 5 pounds of muscle in 2 years, or I put 30 pounds on my deadlift in 6 months. The work that you're doing isn't going to be immediately evident. But over the course of a lifetime, when you continuously show up for yourself, that's the people that are truly walking around with swagger. That's the people that are really confident because they've actually shown up for themselves and they did what they said they were going to do.
Yeah, I love that. It's also as well progressive overload with your nutrition knowledge because it's like when you start out, I know, you don't even have to track. You literally don't have to. And this is gonna people are gonna be listening going, what the fuck? You got to track everything, you got to weigh everything. You absolutely do not. And we're under this sort of illusion that it has to be going down the route of disordered food behaviors, relationships, etc. to get results. And it's absolutely not the case. And also, there's that integrated being able to just essentially control things more, cut down, as we've spoken about, meals out, etc., etc. Maybe then you look at tracking, maybe then you do, set meal timings, etc., etc. If you go down more like the competitive route, you can do that. And then being able to flex through the phases rather than all in and all out and all in because you've gone all out and all out again. And this repetitive cycle that builds the food pathologies, it's like, actually, could we just be a little, rather than tracking everything in off season, do we add a bit of flexibility there and calm the mental noise a little bit? When it's go time, it's go time. But again, that's missing, isn't it? Because it's like we have to do this one way of doing the nutrition, one way of training. It's not like that though. And I mean, us talking about it's a step, but it's like sometimes I think it's difficult to sometimes try and educate people on that you can just start, you can just start.
Yeah, I mean, precision is really only required if you have a very specific goal.
Mm.
Like I don't want my clients to track forever. I want them to learn how to make good decisions without having to have a food scale. I want them to make good decisions practicing by going out to a restaurant, by going to a family function. And again, it all comes down to portion control, really, at the end of the day. Like all we're trying to do is just control the amount of calories that we're trying to take in. And obviously, certain foods, it's just easier. If you're eating lean meats and you're eating vegetables and you're eating fruits and natural starches, you're generally not going to overconsume those things because they're filling and they're full of fiber and they're full of nutrients. And you're not going to come back for seconds and thirds because that's mindful consumption. That's intentional consumption. That's planned consumption, as opposed to how many average people live is they're just running from responsibility to responsibility, task to task. They don't have a plan in place. They're not prepared ahead of time. They don't spend, the hour in the kitchen ingredient prepping all of their stuff so that they can make better decisions. When they go out to a restaurant, they see it as a chance to deviate away from their normal behavior, and that's where the gluttony starts to kick in, as opposed to like if I'm going out to eat several times a week, I can't afford to have every meal be a vacation. I need to be able to monitor my consumption to some degree, and it just takes practice. It just takes like, how do I want to feel? Ask yourself that question. What are my standards for myself? What is the bare minimum amount of effort that I want to be able to put into this that isn't going to feel like sacrifice, that isn't going to feel restrictive? And those are the hardest places to be because it takes self-awareness and it takes having to actually sit with yourself uncomfortably and figure out what it is the fuck that you actually want. And that could take the rest of your life, but it's still a very worthy activity to do because even if it buys you back, let's say the first 40 years of your life, you were miserable and uncomfortable and your mental health sucked. That doesn't have to persist. Now, the rest of your life from 40 to 80 can be nothing but peace and green grass because you've spent the work now trying to figure it out what problems you're having and how to fix those problems. Maybe not fix, but
Heal.
improve those problems. But now you've just bought yourself back 40 more years of freedom that you don't have to worry about food and it doesn't control you anymore.
Yeah, that reminds me as well of like the resentment side of things to the process of nutrition, good nutrition. And again, it's like, depending on what form of monitoring your nutrition you're doing, it's like even tracking in itself, it can bring about squeezing things in and trying to make the most use of your nutrition for your preferences and not just residing over to guys like fruit, veggies, some starches, some protein, some good fats. And I don't know if it's a train in your palate or what, but I like these foods, right? Like, and I like them, every day. I eat pretty much the same thing. I've broadened my own nutrition profile, etc., over the years, and not been so. Austin takes the piss. He's like, you've eaten 5 foods for 5 years. I'm like, sorry, Austin. But it's like, this. Why is it these foods are deemed as like fucking boring or I don't like that? I don't know. A lot of it's going to be to do with upbringing as well. But it's like I like the good food, and I know you do. Obviously, I like other foods as well, but generally speaking,
Yeah, I mean, I eat certain things because they make me feel a certain way.
yeah.
Like again, do I want to eat burgers and pizza and wings and ice cream and cookie? Of course I do. And who doesn't? But it's just a matter of like if you start to view a food as you would a drug or alcohol, I think your relationship with it would change a little bit because most people are probably not going to drink it to excess every single day. They have jobs to do, they have kids to take care of. Like you can't just be fucked up all day long. Most people are probably like, let's say you're a recreational drug user. Let's say you're somebody who goes to raves and parties and does things like Molly or cocaine or ketamine or whatever. There's probably a limit to how much you want to take before it sends you into a headspace that you don't like. But people have to be able to apply those same rules to food. Like food has to have rules around it. It can't just be a free for all whenever you feel like it because we're not living in a time where all we have available to us is fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, lean proteins. Like these things require preparation.
Mm,
You can't just go and grab those things at a gas station. What you can go and grab conveniently is typically not going to have the same nutritional profile that's going to keep you full, keep you satisfied, and not have you come back for seconds. So it will require some work, it will require some mindfulness. But if you start to set some rules that don't seem overly restrictive onto your specific circumstances, you're probably going to have a much better outcome long term. And it's not going to feel like you're giving up all your pleasures in life. Because, like, okay, cool. Twice a week, I'm going to go out to eat. Once a week is going to be more indulgent. Once a week is going to be less indulgent.
man.
That's not a hard rule to follow. Like most people, if you were to tell them, like, just do that, that's 2 meals a week that you get to have out. The other 18 meals you have at home, or 20 meals you have at home, you're eating 3 times a day. That's 21 meals a week. That's not unreasonable to ask for. And I think most people would be absolutely fine with that type of a structure. But it requires preparation, it requires mindfulness, and it requires follow through.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the kicker, isn't it? It's like I've got to do this for myself. Oh, I didn't realize that was part of the deal. I was actually going to ask you today as well, because the last pod we did, you were doing some fasting periods. I was going to ask you if you're still doing that. I did a story earlier saying we will talk about fasting. What's the vibe? What
No.
we saying?
Uh, it was an interesting challenge, if nothing else. Like what it made me realize is that like I could be a little hungry and be okay. It's not an alarm bell to be hungry. And what I also realized is I just enjoy eating.
I love
I enjoy being able to eat when I feel like eating. And it wasn't like a hard rule. Like I was only fasting 1 day a week. But over the course of those, I think I did it for like 6 or 8 weeks.
that.
I lost almost 10 pounds.
Oh wow, okay.
But I mean, you got to attribute that mostly to glycogen, mostly to water. It wasn't like I lost 10 pounds of fat. I did noticeably get a little bit weaker. I noticed that in the gym, like my towards the back end of my sets and reps, like I definitely didn't have that same ability to push to failure. I wanted to bail much, much earlier at the end. Like if a set was supposed to be taken to 10 reps, I was like, yeah, I'm good at 7. I'm good at 8. So definitely not the same amount of energy to train with. But like cognitive function was fine, sleep was fine, digestion was fine. Like one day of fasting wasn't bad at all. I just like I had a woman yesterday tell me that she's like she prefers to fast. And I said, how long do you fast for? And she said 36 hours. And I said, you don't like to eat for almost 2 days straight? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, well, then what happens the other 5 days a week with your food consumption? Because something led you to get to 185 pounds and it wasn't fasting. And what we've seen in the evidence over and over and over again is that most people who fast tend to end up over consuming later on because they are hungry and they aren't honoring their hunger and fullness cues throughout the day. And those hunger and fullness cues essentially get broken at some point. So why not just put yourself into a planned reduction of portions or into a planned reduction of calories? Like there's no extra benefit to fasting. There's no extra, like, unless you have debilitating digestive issues, like why choose it? I don't know. I mean, sure, I always encourage people to use themselves as experiments as long as that experiment is planned, controlled, intentional, and you have like an exit strategy out of that experiment. Go ahead, try keto, try fasting, try paleo, try carnivore, do whatever you want. Give yourself a set amount of time. Be like, for 6 or 8 weeks, I'm going to be loyal to this protocol and I'm going to see how I feel on it. And I'm going to collect some data. And based on that data, I'm going to either continue doing it or I'm going to stop and go back to my normal pattern of eating. So there's nothing wrong with that. I just think that people grab onto these things because they think that's the magic bullet for results, as opposed to it all works. It just depends on what you prefer.
Yeah, magpie syndrome or shiny object. I actually fast in the mornings just because I find that I do my steps in a prep or a diet. I'll do my cardio, do some work, and then I eat my meal, and then I get more food. I like eating like you, right? So I get more food for the rest of the day. I like a meal before bed because I don't want to go to bed fucking starving unless I'm tail end of a prep. And it's like actually that really works for me. What works for you, right? And this is again something that can be missing, but I think it's important because if you can't adhere to it, it ain't gonna fucking work.
No, it's just it's Stan Efferding. I'm gonna always go back to him. He said it once, and I'll never forget this. And I think it's what everybody needs to believe is that compliance is the science. I don't care what you know about autophagy or glucose uptake or anything like that. I don't care what you know about nutrition or what you don't know about nutrition. If you can't follow something routinely, it won't work. Whether it's eating well, whether it's eating in a deficit, whether it's eating in a surplus, whatever it is, if you can't follow through on it consistently enough, then you don't get to say it worked or it didn't work.
For
Plain
sure.
and simple. It's just, it doesn't have to go beyond that.
Yeah. And it probably is going to be fairly simple things that you can look at if, when it comes to adherence, when it comes to tracking all of these things. Could just be that you're licking the spoon, guys. It might not be a very complex problem. However, there can be, of course, complexities as well. Well, my friend, what an episode. I fucking love podding with you.
I appreciate it. It's always nice. And I'm happy that you're only 8 hours ahead of me now.
Yeah, I know. Fucking hell, when I was in Thailand, it's like, this is so stressful. I can't get
I
my
know.
favorite guests on. I love
Well,
it.
thank you. I appreciate you having me on. If any of your audience is ever struggling with anything, I'm happy to answer my DMs. I mean, I
It's
help as many
you,
people as I can with whatever I can.
it's you on the DMs as well. You haven't got a VA.
No, no,
Not our vibe.
no. Nobody could do what I do the way I do it. I'm not going to pay some person to take care of my responsibilities for me.
Yeah. Nobody is you, my G. Well, thank you. And of course,
Likewise.
we'll keep in touch and you will be back on. I already know that.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Bye.
Adios.